have time for just a few questions, and I want to start off with you, Saeeda. What do you think all of this means in the relative context of the Middle East?
Sure. Thank you for that. Look, I think the Middle East is a very interesting market, if you will. There are lots of customer segments, and let's not lose sight, that's really and truly what this is about. It is about serving your customers, and it is about finding the niches that are as yet unserved. So if we look at the Middle East, there are three very, very prominent customer segments that are not served by conventional, traditional banks. First and foremost, the one we all know, the one we all love, the millennials, the younger generation, the tech-savvy generation. They don't necessarily like the old way of banking. They don't want to go to the bank. They want the bank to come to them. That's one part of it. The second segment that is not yet served is around the SMEs. There is a lot of pain in that segment because people, banks, don't understand their needs. They're not retail, they're not corporate, they're a different hybrid. And nobody has yet figured out how to really and truly serve them. And then there is a very large segment of unbanked customers out there where there is a large need for financial inclusion. So if I look at it, there are these three big customer segments that are driving this need towards digital banking, digitization, and disruption.
So what you're telling me is that the millennials aren't like me. I wake up in the morning and the first thing I think about is I want to go to the bank and wait in line for a few hours. So they have a different concept of what banking really means. And do you think, I mean, to Anthony's point about raising capital, to start a bank, do you think that is going to be problematic in the Middle East, or do you think that will be easy to do?
I think banks in the Middle East have figured out a slightly different way to go at this. So while challenger banks are very prominent in a lot of the other parts of the world, if you look at the Middle East, neobanks are taking off. Neobanks are basically existing financial institutions that are launching separate banks. And that bank, for all practical purposes, is a completely separate being. It shares the infrastructure, it shares the license. In some ways, it might even share the core. But in terms of being run as a business, it is run entirely separately. And it is scary because the last slide that you showed was challenger banks don't have four things. They don't have a customer base, they don't have a brand, they don't have income, and they don't have channels. If you look at neobanks, they have three of those. They have the customer base because they can tap into what the parent bank has. They have the brand because if you look at most of the neobanks that are out here, have a little powered by. And by the way, research also shows that roughly 7 out of 10 customers in that target market that I just talked about will trust a bank as long as it has that powered by symbol at the bottom. And the third thing is channels. They have access to the channels of the parent bank. So I think capital is absolutely one thing, but there are other ways in which banks have figured out how to get around it.
And if we look at the evolution of the startup of a bank, Anthony, are the people who start the bank the same people who will run the bank ultimately?
It's a really good question. If I may, before I answer that, I'll just address that previous question. Because the obvious answer is, why don't existing banks dominate the neobank market? Because they have the capital, they have the infrastructure, they have the access to markets. And I think the answer is very simply around culture. I've looked at this in many different markets, and they are not prepared to set up an entirely standalone business that over time may eat their parent business. You go, well, wouldn't it be better to be eaten by your own child than eaten by somebody else's children? But that's a separate point. To your point about growing a business in both Metro Bank and Atom Bank, my experience is that people who are really good at the startup phase, fast, agile, making decisions on the fly, putting things together very, very quickly, spinning up environments, fast failure, the people who are good at that and who like that are not often good at the, in inverted commas, business as usual piece. And one of the lessons I learned from my first bank was in the second bank, you have to be really clear with people and say, your role may just be the first 2 or 3 years, and we will reward you appropriately for that. But you may well not make the transition to business as usual in the longer term of the bank.
So basically, if I look at it from like a technology point of view, the CIO could stand for career is over. So it's a very short window of time in the startup phase of all of that.
Well, I don't want to work in a business as usual bank. I enjoy the building, the creation, that stage of it, and both with Metro Bank and Atom Bank, there came a point where it was really clear to me I should move on. It might have been clear to others earlier that I should have moved on, but it was clear to me at that particular point I should move on.
Michael, in the South African market, if we think of the big 5 banks there and how they sort of dominate the entire thing, bringing a new bank into that environment, who do you see as your target market?
So I'm going to answer the question and the other two as well, if I may.
Okay.
So clearly, our particular business, you need to have a smartphone, and we're going to have a card, so you have access to physical cash, which are the 2 things you need. So I'd like to say it's anyone with a smartphone and a card. But it'll probably be those that are fee sensitive and just feel either through their rebellious nature or they can't afford it, that would like it. And we truly think we can bring complete new functionality to the market that will help families, groupings, and also small businesses, because it's quite a neglected market in South Africa. We're fully cognizant of the fact that we don't have those channels and the capital, etc., but we're coming up with interesting ideas how to solve it. So on the capital side, for example, Anthony and I were starting a debate before we met. We decided that we can't make a big difference in lending in South Africa. We think that's a very competitive market. So we would rather open a marketplace on our platform and allow other providers to vie for our customers, which means that our capital requirement is so much less. You know, that's one way of starting it. And clearly we want to do that for insurance and a number of other products as well. So the question really is the innovators' dilemma, which is the famous book by Christian Claytonson, Why Don't the Big Banks Do It? And it is that if you started within your own bank, it will be drowned. HR will tell you can't appoint people in those salary scales, and marketing will say that's not according to our color scheme and so on, and you know all the innovation will go away. And you start it elsewhere, and sometimes you just don't have the right people to do it. Out of interest, what I can tell you is that we've been inundated with every tech company across the globe, and a whole lot of other institutions have said, can we take an interest in you? And we've deliberately said no, because we want to keep our purpose, we want to keep our overheads low, we don't want short-term or immediate profitability. The ultimate thing is we don't need to get 100%, 50, 20 or 10% of the market. If we get 2% of the South African market with our incredibly low cost base, we will already be washing our face. The potential over time is just much bigger. There's a new generation out there growing up, not paying for WhatsApp, not paying for Facebook, and wondering why they should pay every time they swipe their card. It's crazy. So free is the new normal. Free is the default price of our time. Why can't banking be free?
I look at these patterns of young people, both in the East and in the West and in the Middle East, and there's a common denominator. It's not, we find it in one country or not. It's really a global phenomenon that's happening across all of these markets, that people are starting to question the fundamentals of how a bank works and what their relationship is. It's that.
So we looked to address that very point. And we said, why don't we make it fee-free, and we'll just charge you a monthly amount for your account. And we did a big piece of research, and I'll give you a very small piece of research, was when I presented it to my children. And I said, here you go, here's your app. This is what it's going to do for you. It'll pull together all of your financial information in one place. You can slice and dice it any way you want to. You can predictively model, if you keep spending this much in Starbucks, how much in debt you're going to be by the end of the year. And they went, that's great. And I said, but you've got to pay for it. And they said, well, maybe I'd pay $2.95 in the App Store for it. Maybe. I went, no, you're going to have to pay $5 a month for this. And I won't say what my children said to me because it's not for mixed company. But their response was a resounding no.
Yeah, I had the same experience with my son, and when I showed him these apps and things, the first question he had was, well, how do I link it to your account so I can get your money? you know, and it was amazing because they just had a different view of these things altogether. Just one final comment from each of you. If we look at the opportunities that fintech provides us now, not just as bankers, but as in society in general, what do you think is the one message, if you had to talk to young people today, what is that one opportunity that you see? I love putting people on the spot like that.
Well, I think where we are in banking, there really and truly is a discontinuity. And this is the time where, for the first time, in my view, the consumers can get involved in shaping the future of banking. I don't think this has ever happened before, not at this scale. So, not that the youth needs it, but I would encourage that go out and be part of this and shape it such that the next generation of banking is exactly in line with what their needs are.
So the first thing I learned in media training was don't answer the question you were asked. Answer the question you'd like to have been asked. The question I'd like to have asked me is what is the future of mobile banking? And I think it is going to be marketplace. It is going to be that opportunity to bring together all of a customer's financial information in one place and then to offer them other products and services in an environment which they feel comfortable buying. But I think it's going to take some time.
And I will answer the question only because I heard really smart words from a really smart guy who said, as a consumer, I want to know why a relationship I have with your bank is going to make my life better. And if you can do that, you will succeed.
And I think...
It was Joe's words, by the way, last night.
But I think you hit on the key. The new KPI that customers are using for us as bankers is my life getting better having a relationship with your bank? And with that, I'd like to thank you for making the journey here and sharing your thoughts and ideas with us, because you really are sort of out in front. You're pioneering, and we're going to learn from the missteps and the successes that you've had. And I'd like to thank you, all three, for coming and spending some time with us. Thank you.
Thank you.